Washington State Republican Party is celebrating the passage of 3 common sense initiatives into law. Those 3 laws include restoring reasonable police pursuits, establishing parental notification rights in public schools, and codifying no personal income tax in our state. Tonight I spoke with GOP Chairman Jim Walsh to see how they'll have a positive impact on Washingtonians. These issues, you talked about how important these issues were, and it was outside of party lines. Do you feel like for the 3 of the 6 to have succeeded, it really was a bipartisan effort?
Oh, it absolutely was. You can see the votes. There were a few no's, but while they weren't quite unanimous, the votes were very strong. They were almost unanimous. So it was absolutely bipartisan. And I mean, some of that was real support for the reforms. Mm-hmm. There might have been a little bit of political calculation going on there too, but that's okay. The support for the 3 that passed into law was absolutely bipartisan, and I'm very grateful to all of my colleagues in Olympia for getting behind those 3.
Jim, in your experience and with your history, is something like what happened this year, is that rare?
Well, sure. It's not so rare to have initiatives, but so many at once was historical. We've never had this many before. There was one time there were 3, and then there was another year there were 2. But generally, it's been kind of 1 or 2 through most of our history. To do 6 in 1 year cycle, it was historic. And I think this speaks to a growing desire in Washington for the kind of political pendulum to come back to the middle. Mm-hmm. I think that the issues in law and policy that these 6 initiatives address, they're not really bipartisan. They were pretty far to one side. And I think there is a desire among people in this state to bring politics and bring law and bring the debates back to kind of the middle of the field. And I think these initiatives are part of that. They are a step in bringing that political debate and the political frame back to the middle.
I think you are bringing up an issue that brings back a sense of optimism with the people of Washington, that parties can work together. At the same time, this is a presidential election year where politics can swing wildly in one direction or the other. But are you optimistic that moving forward, at least in our state, that cooperation can exist moving forward?
Oh, I am. I mean, and it's already happening. And this past session, the legislative session, Olympia, that just ended, it was more bipartisan. There was more agreement than I've seen in the last few sessions. In the so-called short sessions, we focus a lot on budgets, on supplemental budgets. So some of it was pretty wonky budgetary work. But we have 3 budgets in the state government, of course. Operating, the big one, transportation and capital construction. Those are the 3. At least 2 of the 3, the capital construction budget and the transportation budget, were very bipartisan, really unanimous or close to unanimous. The operating budget was a little more partisan. That was a little more debated, but it still passed. And we were able, even those of us who were sort of on the tug of war there on the operating budget, we got some parts we liked, so it was okay too. And I think that we're going to see this going forward. It's a good thing to remember about these initiatives, the 3 that do go to the ballot in the general election in November. They are literally the top of the ticket. They are the first items you'll see on the ballot when you go to vote in November, even above the presidential race. They are literally the top of the ticket. And I like that because they are very Washington focused. Mm-hmm. They're not national issues. They're explicitly our state's issues. And I think it'll keep the ballot in November grounded in Washington stuff and Washington law and Washington politics. And I like that. I like focusing on our state. It's so in these presidential election cycles, everywhere, the presidential race often grabs all the attention. Everything becomes very national. And I like the fact that this year in our ballot in November, the first items are going to be Washington items. And I think that'll be good.
All right. It goes to the voters in November, as you mentioned. Chairman Jim Walsh, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Oh, it was great to talk to you.